Hey, and welcome to my top 10 ranking of Elden Ring's weapons. This ranking was based on my own experience after about 1,500 hours with the game. I will briefly go over my reasoning behind the rankings and occasionally give some tips on what I think is the best way to use the weapon featured. All of the background footage has been recorded in New Game 7 and with 80 in basically every stat, but everything I will mention will be valid for a first playthrough. Let's get started with number 10, Bloodhound's Fang. This weapon is the definition of the old reliable. You can get it very early, it scales with dex and strength and even has some bleed buildup. It's also one of the only somber weapon in the game that can be imbued with elements. It pairs really well with the Bloodflame Blade incantation or the Lightning Blade. The Ash of War it comes with is also worth mentioning. It's a two-part attack that does a lot of stance damage and even grants you some iframes. It is also the best weapon to pair with Morgott's Cursed Sword on a first playthrough. It's only at number 10 because I think there are better options later on, but it can still be viable till the end game in a proper build. At number 9, we got Malekith's Black Blade, a badass Ash of War, destined death and good scaling. What's not to love? While its damage is part holy, which is a bad thing, it does huge physical damage and the destined death effect is percentage based, meaning that the damage it does will scale with the boss's health, which makes it kinda viable for NG+ and above. Honestly, this weapon is mostly here because of style, but it has some good things going for it, and it can be very good in some situations. Taking the 8th spot is the infamous Moonveil, easily one of the best options for a spell sword build. It scales with dex and intelligence, has innate bleed, and an overpowered Ash of War. It can be used standalone or as a side piece to your more powerful spells. The Ash of War is the real star here. It breaks most bosses in 3 hits, has decent range, and deals good damage. You can literally left trigger your way to victory with this weapon. And bonus points for making everyone salty in PvP. Fisting its way into number 7 is the Star Fist. Probably one of the most underrated weapon in Elden Ring, the Star Fist has a lot of advantages. It's very lightweight, has innate bleed, and can be power stanced by simply two-handing it, meaning that you'll only have one weapon to upgrade as opposed to 2 different ones. And the second Star Fist also won't count towards your carry limit. But wait, there's more. Because both Star Fists only count as one weapon, any buff you apply to your main hand will also apply to your offhand. A very fun way to make use of that is the Royal Knight's Resolve Ash of War. It increases your next attack by 80%, but because both Star Fists only count as one weapon, it buffs both of them. You can then have your build revolve around charged attack damage, and unleash massive charged attacks with one-shot potential. If you're looking for a fun weapon type to try out, give the Fist a go. Though I still have to mention the biggest drawback of this weapon, which is its terrible range. Drilling right through to number 6 is the Mare Executioner's Sword. This sword does physical damage. It scales primarily with strength, but also with arcane. The main strong point of this weapon other than the good base damage is the Ash of War. You can quite literally turn your sword into an electric drill, but it drills HP instead of materials. It's already powerful as it is, but you can make it even stronger by stacking buffs to successive attacks. The things that bring this weapon down in my opinion are the high requirements, and the setup to make it work to its full potential can only be obtained near the end of the game. Other than that, it's definitely a top tier weapon. I have a build showcase using this weapon on my channel if you're interested. The first weapon to make its way in the top 5 is the Gargoyle Twin Blade. This weapon scales primarily with strength, it has good base damage, and even better scaling. It can be infused with Ashes of War and affinities, making it easy to fit in most builds. The Gargoyle Twin Blade truly shines when paired with a Bleed or Frost build. Its jump attack does a total of 4 hits, making status effects easy to apply, and you probably know how strong status effects are. This, on top of the good base damage, is why this weapon is one of the best in the game. You can check my Twin Blade showcase for the best build to pair with this weapon. Oh, and everything I just said also applies to the Beastman Curved Sword, which is just as good. So consider this a 2-for-1. My pick for number 4 is the Darkmoon Greatsword. This sword can only be obtained at the end of the game, and there are good reasons for that. It scales primarily with intelligence, and a little with dex and strength. It does both magic and physical damage, but its real strength lies in its Ash of War. When used once, it allows you to send out a blade projectile with every charged attack for a decent period of time. The projectile does decent damage by itself, but there are ways to make it do even more. If you do a charged attack at close range and hit with both the projectile and the sword itself, it will basically do double damage. And even though the projectile isn't affected by buffs to charged attacks like the Axe Talisman, the sword hitbox itself is. It also does massive stance damage. Overall, one of the best weapon in the game, and my pick for number 4. The first weapon to break in the top 3 is Mogwin's Sacred Spear. This is the bigger, better, non-weeb version of Rivers of Blood. This spear scales with strength and faith. It has innate bleed and does good damage. It also does thrusting damage, so it can be used behind a shield and buffed with the Spear Talisman. The unique Ash of War on this weapon is just busted. It lets you raise the spear in the air, causing massive damage and bleed buildup in a big radius. This will absolutely melt anything that isn't resistant to bleed. It will also imbue the spear with blood flame for a decent period of time. This weapon is only at number 3 because it will struggle a little against enemies that are resistant to bleed. But the raw damage will still be enough to not make it completely useless, like some other bleed weapons. Overall, a very fun weapon and definitely the best in some cases. Coming in at number 2 is the Blasphemous Blade. This is actually the weapon I used to beat the game on my first playthrough. And oh boy, I knew I unlocked easy mode the moment I pressed L2. This great sword does physical and fire damage. It scales with faith and strength. It's already a respectable great sword in itself, but as is often the case, its unique Ash of War takes it to another level. Taker's Flame lets you slam the sword into the ground, sending a fiery blast forward. This attack does great HP and stance damage, and just like the Darkmoon Greatsword, the projectile and the sword itself count as a hitbox. It also heals you for about 12% of your health with every hit. If this attack didn't heal, it would still be top tier. But the healing makes the Blasphemous Blade the uncontested best beginner weapon in my opinion. It lets you trade hits and make more mistakes. This weapon could easily be considered the best in the game, but there's another one that takes the cake for me. And my pick for the best weapon in Elden Ring is Vikeswar Spear. Just kidding. We're serious people here. My pick for number 1 is Death's Poker. This is basically a blasphemous blade on steroid. It scales with intelligence and dexterity and has innate frostbite build-up. It does mostly physical, but also a tiny bit of magic damage. But let's get to the real meat of this weapon. You guessed it, the Ash of War. Ghost Flame Ignition works in 2 parts. Doing a light attack after the initial cast will produce a long line of ghost flame on the ground that does damage over time and frost build-up. Doing a heavy attack will cause an explosion of ghost flame, also causing massive damage and frost build-up. This Ash of War really adds some depth to the gameplay compared to a more straightforward weapon like the Blasphemous Blade. It makes you think about what version of the attack would be better in any given scenario. Both attacks will cause massive damage, but one is more akin to bigger and slower enemies, and the other more suitable for faster and nimbler ones. You can use this weapon alone, power stance it, or use it as a side piece to your faster spells. In any case, the Death's Poker will be a great addition to your builds, and my favorite weapon in Elden Ring. And with that said, that was my top 10. Most of the weapons here could be considered number 1, especially the top 4. But I had to make a choice. Make sure to let me know in the comments what you agreed or disagreed with. I'm curious to know. And tell me if you would like more top 10s in this style. Thanks for watching, and see you later.